Loads of crazy people, but nobody bats an eyelid at them. All right, where to begin? I asked my audience on Instagram and on the YouTube community tab what assumptions they had about New York City if they've never visited before, and we got tons of responses, so let's get started. Everything's expensive. In fact, I got this response more than any other, even in Spanish. And it's true, visiting New York can be a very expensive experience. In one particular area, lodging, staying in hotels, specifically in Midtown Manhattan or downtown Manhattan, anything over 3 stars is gonna cost you some change, especially if you're coming during a peak tourist season. Also, if you wanna go out to eat at restaurants for every single meal, it's gonna cost you money. If you wanna move to New York City and pay rent in some of the more trendy neighborhoods of New York, like Greenwich Village, where I live, you're gonna be spending a lot of money. Now, I did a whole video about how to save money if you're on a budget in New York. I'm gonna put a card to that above here somewhere. But if your trip is going to revolve around going to the main tourist attractions and eating at Katz's Deli, it is definitely not going to be a cheap trip. There's a lot of hot dogs and food trucks. Okay, there are tons of food trucks in New York City. This is actually a great thing. As far as standalone hot dog vendors though, not so common anymore. In fact, you are far more likely to run into a halal cart, which will be selling falafels and different things, and they may have hot dogs as well. But to be honest, I know so few people that live here that actually like hot dogs and would say, hey, let's go outside and grab a hot dog. No, you're more likely to go out to grab a slice of pizza. So yes, you can find hot dog carts, but they are not as common as they used to be. Tourists are easily spotted. Yes and no, and this is true of any big tourist destination around the world. I mean, I can generally spot a tourist because they're all wearing backpacks, they're standing 3 or 4 in a row, possibly blocking the sidewalk, have a camera with a strap around their neck, maybe have a guidebook out or a map out. Most New Yorkers will notice tourists only if they're doing something to hinder their movement throughout the day, like blocking the door on a subway, something like that. I really like this assumption. Real New Yorkers are grumpy, and all anyone does is sit in coffee houses or bars and talks in groups. I don't know if you're imagining the beatniks from the 1950s maybe, but no, I don't quite think that real New Yorkers are all sitting in coffee shops or bars. However, the grumpy part is interesting, and I'm gonna tell you why. If you live in New York City and you commute 5 days a week, 9 to 5, specifically in the busier areas, I could definitely see you assuming that most New Yorkers are grumpy because, I work from home. If I had to commute every day to Midtown, I'd be grumpy too. Commutes can be slow, crowded, you have to deal with tourists and other commuters. I don't think real New Yorkers are necessarily grumpy, but they may just be more jaded than your average visitor here. We will leave it at that. I've always assumed it never gets hot in NYC. There's a reason I'm filming this video indoors right now in February when it's about 35 degrees outside and windy. I also encourage you to come back in 6 months in August when it's pushing 90 degrees and very humid outside. So yeah, New York gets all types of weather. This was a really long one, so I'm just gonna highlight one segment. Rooms are super small and not always in the cleanest places in some of the budget-friendly spots. I've never seen a hotel room in New York City as small as the room I had in Hiroshima, Japan, but New York, especially in Midtown Manhattan, if you're gonna be staying there, likely your room is not going to be as large as it would be in other destinations around the United States. I think most people don't really care about the size of their hotel room if the location is good, just like many New Yorkers, not all, don't care about the size of their apartment, like my apartment, if the location is good. And as far as the rooms not being clean, competition for hotel rooms in New York City is so fierce that any business or any brand that is not providing clean rooms for their guests, they're gonna get hammered online and they're gonna lose a lot of that business. So I think not having a clean room, unless you're staying in an absolute dump, is not going to be likely. You know, my best tip for New York City lodging is to rent just a room in an Airbnb, because it's going to give you options in different neighborhoods that maybe don't even have hotels available. It's going to be cheaper, and if you're interested in getting $40 off your first Airbnb stay, check out my referral link in the description. It's the city that never sleeps. Yes, the New York City branding, and a great assumption. I have been to so many other places around the United States, and one of the biggest things that I always notice is if I walk around after 10 or 11 o'clock, I always think to myself, where is everybody? Because you get so used to living in New York and always being surrounded by other people and always being surrounded by noise, that I was staying in downtown Los Angeles this past September and it felt like a ghost town. And I realized this is the second largest city in the United States. Okay, Marina from Brazil wrote a lot, so I'm just gonna highlight one segment about having everything you want to buy in the city, including bubble tea, which is hard to find for her. First of all, the bubble tea craze in New York City right now is insane. Literally in the last 6 months, 3 different bubble tea spots have opened up within a 2-minute walk of my apartment. A bit of overkill, I even have to admit. Although Adriana left the apartment to go hang out at a bubble tea spot while I filmed because I'm so loud and she doesn't want to hear me right now. The bubble tea assumption, very true. And as far as having the ability to find anything you want in New York, this is pretty true as well. I've been amazed at the random things that I could only find in New York City that just as one US destination. I wanted to take a quick opportunity to show you Adriana's art wall behind me. If you are interested in purchasing pet art, here are some samples from Adriana, putting a link to her Etsy store in a card in the description, even give you a 10% discount for being a viewer of this channel. What an amazing gift this would make. Jordan Johnston wrote, I assume it's a lot of rich or homeless based off of the movies. Okay, we're gonna start with your assumption about being all rich people. Yes, New York City definitely has more rich people than any other city in the United States, and definitely up there amongst the world's population, but not everyone who lives here is rich. I mean, yeah, if you live in Soho or Tribeca, clearly you have enough money to afford expensive rent. But just because somebody pays a lot of money in rent, and just because somebody dresses really well, does not mean they're rich. It just could mean they spend a lot of money. You don't know what's in their bank account. So no, not everyone in New York City is rich. Now, as far as the homeless population, this is difficult, and I'm really not qualified to answer that question, but I will just go off of my observations. You will see homeless people around New York, although it is not as widespread as some other cities that I have seen around the world, and I will just leave it at that. And if you are interested in volunteering with the homeless for a day, check out my video that we shot at the Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen. It really is a great volunteer opportunity if you're interested. Crystal Shannon wrote, I assume I will get lost lots. I do not assume you will get lost lots, because Manhattan especially is pretty easy to navigate. I mean, if you stay above the Village, Manhattan is running on a grid. So if you're gonna get lost, you're only gonna get lost walking towards the East River or walking to the Hudson River. Have you ever seen the Tokyo subway map? You wanna talk about getting lost? Go to Tokyo and just do download City Mapper before you come to New York. That's my biggest tip for anybody who does not want to get lost. Absolutely a lifesaver of an app. We got a few assumptions about rats being everywhere in New York, and then I've also heard the opposite from people, tourists who visited here and said, I don't think that's true. I never saw a rat. Look, I don't see rats every day in New York. The one place where I will consistently see them is on the subway. Just the other day, Adriana and I noticed a dog was staring down, and we saw what the dog was looking at. It was a rat running along the subway tracks. So if you're afraid of rats, if you don't want to see rats in New York, my best advice for you is do not stare down when you are waiting for that train, or you could be in for a surprise. Tall buildings that make you feel like an ant. Yes and no. I mean, if you spend your entire trip in Manhattan, spending most of it in Midtown or downtown in the financial district, yeah, you could definitely feel like an ant there. However, there's parts of New York City in the Bronx, Staten Island, Queens that honestly feel pretty suburban. For many New Yorkers, that big city feeling that skyscraper effect is not really there. Loads of crazy people, but nobody bats an eyelid at them. All right, where to begin? Yes, there are lots of people doing strange things in New York City. Are you gonna run into it all the time? No. Will you run into it? Possibly. Are there mentally ill people walking around or on the subway? Yes, for sure. Is it something that's likely going to affect you? Probably not, but if you're not used to seeing people, talking to themselves or acting in a way that you may find unstable, it could alarm you. You should always be aware of your surroundings, and if somebody is walking towards you and they appear unstable in some way, feel free to cross the street. In fact, I did it myself last week. That 7 days may not be enough to visit the best places of NY. Look, if you want to visit the main tourist attractions in New York City, I think you could accomplish it in 7 days. I think you'd be very tired after those 7 days, and I think you'd spend a lot of money after those 7 days. I've lived in the city for almost a decade. I grew up in the area, and there's still a lot of things that I haven't seen. So is 7 days enough to see the best places? I don't know. It depends what your definition of best places are, but the more time you spend here, the more interesting stuff you can definitely do. It's very accepting with the LGBT plus community. Yes, absolutely. In fact, New York City is very accepting of any race, religion, sexual orientation, whatever you are, you're gonna be accepted here. That is definitely one of the best parts of living in New York City, in my opinion, is just the acceptance of everybody from anywhere. That there are a lot of pickpockets. There are a lot of pickpockets in Barcelona, Spain. As far as New York City is concerned, I don't really think pickpocketing is such an epidemic. I do have a story about this. I was actually at a bar maybe, 8, 9 years ago in the East Village, and it had a dance floor in the basement. And I saw this guy grinding up on some women, and his hands were roaming everywhere, like trying to go into their purses or into their pockets. And it was so obvious. He was so bad at it that the bouncers quickly spotted him and gave him the boot. So yeah, pickpocketing could happen in New York, but it's not as prevalent, I would say, as some other crimes you could run into here. The air isn't fresh. Look, this isn't like breathing in the mountain air in Patagonia, Argentina, but the air quality here is better than, let's say, Mexico City or Beijing. Is New York the perfect place without pollution? Absolutely not, but I don't think it's somewhere I would necessarily worry about the air quality hindering you during a trip here. That everyone is very fashionable. Well, obviously, look at me right now. No, I don't think every New Yorker cares about fashion. I think this perception is there from magazines and movies and well-dressed extras scrolling through every shot. But the truth is, if you're visiting New York and you're hanging out in certain neighborhoods, let's say the trendier neighborhoods, Soho, East Village, Williamsburg, yeah, you're gonna see people who do care about fashion, but I would say overall it's a smaller percentage of the entire population. I do think it's a more fashionable city than Des Moines, Iowa, but it's also one of the fashion hubs of the world, so it's to be expected. But no, not every New Yorker cares about fashion that much. Tell me what your assumptions are about New York City that I missed. I'm curious. Thank you so much for watching, as always. Until next time.